Hi, ladies. Today is Monday, April 20th, and we are going to be looking at our packet. We are on week 3, day 1 in your packet, and this is page 28. Our learning target today is I can compare decimals to the thousandths. So we're basically going to be looking at some different decimal numbers and deciding the order that they should be written in, or if one decimal number is greater than or less than another. So once this assignment is done and you have completed the parts that we're going to complete together, as well as your independent practice, you're going to have a homework assignment today on Pearson Realize, like always. It is going to be labeled as 4-20-20 Quick Check, which is listed right up here at the top of the page. So make sure that when you're finished with this assignment and you've watched this video, that you head over to Pearson Realize and make sure that you get that done as soon as possible today so that you can get credit for your homework assignment. Also, just a reminder, tomorrow we have our Zoom video at 11 o'clock, so make sure that you tune into that. If you don't have the information for our Zoom video tomorrow, make sure that you reach out to myself or Miss Egging and we will get that information for you because we would love to see your faces. All right, so we're going to be focusing again on comparing decimal numbers to the thousands. So take a look at number 1. Just a reminder, we are on page 28. It says scientists measured a Madeira cockroach and found it to be 3 and 44 hundredths centimeters long. Toby says that the Madeira is shorter than the Oriental because 3 and 44 hundredths has fewer digits than 3 and 432 thousandths. Is he correct? Explain. So I recommend if you are comparing different digits, that you line up those digits because the best way to do that is to try and figure out what's similar and what is different. Because we've talked about in the past that it doesn't really matter how many digits you have, it matters the value of the digit that you're comparing. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put each of these digits in a place value, okay? So each of these numbers is going to be put in a place value. And then we're going to go down below and do the exact same thing and make sure that each of these digits has its own box. Oops. Oh no, what am I doing? Here we go. All right. So we're looking at these two numbers, and we're noticing that in that ones place, we have threes, then we have our decimal. The tens place, or tenths place rather, both have fours, so they both have a value of 4/10. But then you get to the hundredths place and you're noticing that we have a 4 and a 3. So just because this number has more digits doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bigger number. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're figuring out what is the same. So we have threes in the ones place, we have fours in that tenths place, but then we're noticing that in that hundredths place, we have a 4 and a 3. So the thing that we want to do is we want to circle the number that is different and that is bigger. Okay, so between the 4 and the 3, the 4 is bigger. So that means that this number is actually the larger of the two. So it's not necessarily based off how many digits you have, it's about the value of the digits. And in that first number, 3 and 44 hundredths, although it has less digits, that hundredths place has a larger value than the hundredths place in 3 and 432 thousandths. So we want to make sure that we're going digit by digit, place value by place value, and comparing each place value individually. So let's take a look at number 2. Let's see if I can make this a little bit smaller and get it out of the way. All right. And I am struggling. There we go. Okay. So take a look at number 2. So we're going to do something very similar, but instead of stacking those numbers, we're actually just going to leave them in the place value that they are. We've done this before, so you want to make sure that you're going digit by digit. So we're looking at the ones place, and we see in 3 and 692 thousandths that in the ones place, both of these numbers have a 3. Then we want to move on to the tenths place and see if they're similar or different. So in the tenths place, we have a 6 in both of these digits as well. And then in the hundredths place, we also have a 9. So both numbers have a 9 in the hundredths place. And then we get to the thousandths place. In the thousandths place, we notice we have a 2 and we have a 7. So what we want to do is we want to highlight or circle the largest digit. So the largest digit would be 7, which means that we want to make sure that we are eating that larger number. Okay, so this second number is actually going to be greater than this first number. So same thing on the next one. We want to go digit by digit. So we start in the ones place. We have a 7 in the ones place on both of these. We go to the tenths place, and we notice we have a 2 in the tenths place for both. Then we go to the hundredths place, and this is where we're noticing we have something different. We have a 1 in the hundredths place and a 0 in the hundredths place. And if you notice, the 1 is going to have a higher value or greater value than the 0. So what we want to do is we want to highlight or circle that larger digit, and we want to make sure we eat that larger number. So now we're going to go on to number 4. And on number 4, it's asking us to order these digits from least to greatest. So ordering the decimal numbers from least to greatest, which means that the smallest number is going to go first and the largest number is going to go last. So what I'm going to do, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we want 5 digits. And all right, so we're going to look at number 4, and we're going to take each of these digits and put them in the correct place value. So the next one would be a decimal, 4, oops, 5, 4, 0. And then we go down, we're going to do the same thing. So what you can be doing on your paper is just lining these numbers up, just stacking them so that the digits are right on top of each other. All right, so what we want to do is we're trying to figure out which number is the smallest. So what we're going to do is we're going to go place value by place value. In order to do that, we're going to start in the ones place. So we notice that the ones place, they're all the same, okay? So then we have to move on to the next place value. So then we look at the tenths place, okay? And if you notice, we have a 5 and 2 6s. And remember, we're trying to find the smallest number. So in this digit, we're actually searching for the number that is smallest, which would be this 5, which means that that digit tells us that this whole number is actually going to be the smallest. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a 1 underneath that because that tells me that that one is going to go first in our order. So then we've already used this number, so we don't necessarily need to look at it again. So now we're just going to be focusing on these next two numbers. So we look at the tenths place and we notice that the 6s are the same. So we want to move on to the hundredths place and try and figure out which digit out of the 3 and the 2 are the smallest. So if we're looking at these two numbers, and remember, we don't want to use the 4 anymore because that digit doesn't matter. We've already used that number. So we want to look between the 3 in the hundredths place and the 2 in the hundredths place. And you'll notice that the 2 is our smaller digit, which would mean that this number is actually going to go second in the lineup from least to greatest. And then that's going to leave us with this last number, 5 and 631 thousandths, being the largest of the 3 because this 3 is bigger than the 2, and we already decided that this number was the smallest. So then this one is going to go third. So now we're going to do the exact same thing with the next set of numbers. So right now I want you to just take a few, like 30 seconds, and you're gonna list out these 4 numbers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new chart so that we can work on that one next, because the next numbers are going to, or the next chart needs to have 4 rows. So 2, 3, 4, 5. We want it to have 4 rows. So we're going to do the exact same thing by taking each of these numbers and placing them in a chart so that they all are lined up right on top of each other so that we can compare each of the place values. And remember, we're still going to be ordering them from least to greatest. Decimal 529. And it's also really important that you make sure that your decimals are lined up as well, because that's going to help us to figure out, and I've done it twice now, it's going to help us to make sure that we're looking at the same digits. All right, so now we have number 5 written out, and we're going from least to greatest once again. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at these digits and figure out what we have in common, and figure out which of those numbers is the smallest. So now we're going to be looking at the ones place. And if you notice, we have a 0 in both of the first one and the last one. And we know that 0 is going to be smaller than 1. So we don't want to be looking at these 2 middle rows because those are going to be larger. So now we just want to be looking at this and this. So we notice that these two have the exact same ones place. We go to the tenths place. We notice that they both have a 6. So then we move on to the hundredths place. Remember, we're only focusing on the 9 and the 7 right now. So what we want to do is figure out what is the smaller of the two. So the smaller of the two is going to be this 7. So that means that this digit or this number is actually going to be first in our lineup. And then that also means that this is going to be second, because if we're comparing these two numbers for the smallest spot, that means that if this one is the smallest, then this one has to be next. So then we're going to do this one as number 2. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cross these two numbers off because we don't need them anymore. And we're going to be focusing on the 2 middle numbers. So we notice that the ones are the same, and then we go to the tenths place. We have a 5 and we have a 3. We're trying to figure out which one is smaller. So between the 5 and the 3 is going to be the smaller of the digits. So if this one is smaller than this one, that means that this has to be the 3rd number in our lineup, which would mean this one is the 4th number in our lineup. I'm kind of struggling on writing these. So that's going to be the 4th. All right. So you are going to be responsible for finishing out these last few problems. So you're going to be finishing 6 through 8, which is going to be the exact same as what we did on 2 and 3. And then you're also going to be finishing number 9 and number 10, which is like number 4 and 5. Just a reminder, make sure that you're marking through each of these numbers, circling the one that is bigger and making sure that you're eating that number. And then on number 9 and 10, making sure that you're creating that place value chart on your paper, lining up all of the numbers, and going through and really looking at each of those place values. So we're going to flip to page 29. So this is going to be the next page, page 29 of your packet. And we're going to do a couple of these problems together, and then you will be finishing out a couple of the problems independently. And then don't forget, you have an assignment on Pearson Realize as your homework assignment for today. So on number 11, this is going to be very similar to number 1 that we did about the cockroaches. On this one, it says, explain why it's not reasonable to say that 4 and 23 hundredths is less than 4 and 135 thousandths because 4 and 23 hundredths has fewer digits after the decimal point than 4 and 135 thousandths. So just a reminder, if we put these in a chart to see what the value is of each of these and how those digits compare, um, it's important to remember that we're not focusing on how many numbers each has. Okay, so we don't care that 4 and 135 thousandths has 4 digits and 4 and 23 hundredths only has 3. We're not focusing on that. We're focusing on each place value independently. So when you're looking at that ones place, you're noticing that both of those digits are 4s. So in the ones place, they're equal. But then we move to the tenths place, and you're noticing that we have 2/10 and we have 1/10. Um, and I personally would rather have 2 brownies than 1. So you want to make sure that you're focusing just on the digit. Okay, so you're focusing on each place value and the digit of each place value, not the amount of digits as a whole, because that can be misleading. Because when you think about it, if I were to put a 0 in this last box right here, then they have the exact same amount of digits, but we still are noticing that 23 hundredths or 230 thousandths is going to be the same. It also kind of helps to just focus on these numbers as independently, because these are the same. And if you notice, this is 230 and this is 135. You can kind of think about it that way as well, by focusing on kind of how if they don't have the same amount of digits, giving them the same amount of digits and then comparing them that way. Because now you can really visually see that 230 is going to be greater than 135, or 230 thousandths is greater than 135 thousandths. Whereas when we didn't have this 0, we were focusing more just on the 23, and that does look smaller. So it's really important to make sure that you're focusing on the place values and what they have in common, or maybe what is different. So let's take a look at number 12. On this one, I drew out a number line for you, and I would recommend also drawing that on your paper. It says Carlos wrote 3 numbers between 0 and 33 hundredths and 0 and 34 hundredths. And what numbers could Carlos have written? So on my paper, I put kind of on that number line, the starting point is going to be 33 hundredths, and the ending point is going to be 34 hundredths. And it's important to kind of remember, if we give those numbers the same amount of digits, it makes it a little bit easier to figure out. So if you're kind of trying to figure out in between 330 thousandths and 340 thousandths, it makes it a little bit easier to figure out what numbers you could put in between. And I gave you one example in the center that you can use to help you with that problem as well. On number 13, let me see if I can move this. Doesn't seem to want to get out of the way. Okay, well, on this problem, it's basically asking you to draw lines to match each decimal on the left to its equivalent decimal on the right. Remember, when we have equivalent decimals, that's where we're adding or taking away zeros. And equivalent just means equal. So you basically are just going to try and figure out what numbers are equal based on how many zeros you have. On number 14, it says, is 5/10 greater than or less than 6/10? And I crossed off draw a number line to show your answer, because you don't necessarily have to. If you would like to use those comparison symbols, you can, but make sure that you're explaining your thinking. I would recommend taking 6/10 and writing it as a decimal number, so that you can kind of think about it in that way. Or think about what 5/10 as a fraction would look like and compare them that way. You want them to look similar so it's easier to compare. So you have a couple problems that you're going to be completing independently. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Remember, after you've completed this lesson, and I really suggest that you do complete the lesson before you go to Pearson Realize, because this is where you're going to get your practice, whereas Pearson Realize is kind of that quick check. It's more of the assessment portion. So I'd really like for you to make sure that you're practicing on your paper and then going to Pearson Realize and completing the quick check. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And reminder, we are on pages 28 and 29 today. It is week 3, day 1 in your packet. And we're focusing on comparing decimals to the thousandths. So great job today, ladies.